Hello everybody, and I've decided to do a little spin-off from my series of programming tutorials. Now, I am very aware that the majority of people get into programming because they want to write video games, although there are obviously other reasons, but the predominant reason for people getting into video games, especially at a young age, is to write video games. Now, I want to just quickly deal with something before we get into the video. So, people here who show up expecting to write MMORPGs and modern FPS games like Call of Duty or whatever, leave those ideas at the door, because they're pretty much impossible. Even a professional programmer with like a degree or a PhD or whatever would take hundreds of thousands of man hours to produce something like that, regardless of how fast they can code. And in a lot of cases they'll require like teams of hundreds of thousands of people which are skilled to that degree. So in other words, don't think you can go out to your friends and organise the creation of a game like that, because not only won't it happen because either your friends are unwilling or whatever, but you probably don't have the skill to do it if you're watching this video, although there'll obviously be exceptions to the rules. If you're gonna, for your first game, you're probably gonna want to do something basic, like maybe a text RPG. If you maybe a basic platformer or something like that. Essentially, forget FPS until you've really established yourself in the way you program. Now, obviously, you can go and do things like there's MMORPG makers and there's something called FPS Creator as well, which are reasonably good tools for the job, but obviously you don't have the same personal control over the product as you would programming, which is why I would recommend them to people who want to do something, just make a game without putting any effort in to the same degree as programming. But overall, for most people, I would not recommend it, because it sort of leaves an empty feeling that you didn't really create it, whereas programming gives you, well, they call it the joy of programming for a reason. It gives you the feeling that you've achieved something. It's given you the feeling that it is truly your product that you've created. So now that everyone who wants to build MMORPGs or FPSs has either left or changed their ideas very quickly, I'm going to get on to what you should start doing if you don't know a programming language already. Obviously, I'm going to say go and learn a programming language. Now, you can do this in many ways, though I'm going to state 3 languages that I think are probably a good idea to learn for at least, well, maybe your first one, though there's one that people may disagree with. So the first thing I'm going to mention is a language called Python, which is very easy. It's often taught to children, children and teens. I'm not sure about what it's like in the United States, but they don't teach it over here either. But so it's essentially it's probably one of the easiest yet most powerful programming languages in existence, because you can achieve a lot of the stuff you can achieve in other languages like the ones I teach, but it's more human. It's easier to understand at an English level, if you get my drift. So you can go and learn that. One I'd particularly recommend is a tutorial called Learn Python the Hard Way by Zed Shaw, and that's rather good. I learnt it. I went through it in 3 days. It's a good tutorial. It goes over pretty much all you really need to know, and then you can move on to the next section, which I will talk about after mentioning these other languages. Now, the other languages you can learn. The other languages that I'd probably suggest learning, and there's one sort of wild card on the side, is called C. Now, if you look on my channel, I have a number of tutorials on C, because C is basically the root of the majority of imperative languages, which are the most popular languages in programming. Period. So, I've got tutorials on them. It's very extensive. It will work on everything. There's no exceptions to what you can program C on, except very, very basic things. Like even things like the ZX Spectrum from the early 1980s has a C compiler on it. There's things like it will go back as far as when it was first created in the late 60s, and it's still a good programming language to learn because it teaches those base low-level things as well as being reasonably useful, unlike assembly language, much to my discovery. And the wild card I'd like to suggest is something called Haskell. Now, there's wiki books on that, as there is with the other two, but I never really got into it. It's mainly for people who are, well, it's more mathematical than the other languages. It's less imperative, more mathematical. They call them declarative languages. Now you can go and look at that. I don't know much about it. I looked at it for an afternoon a couple of years ago, and that's all I've really touched of it since. Although one encouraging fact about it is that John Carmack of id Software created a version of Wolfenstein 3D with it as a project. So video games can be created, and they can be created with every other language. There are other ones that I could mention, like C++ and Java, but while Java is a good beginner's language, I don't like it. Frankly, I've got the book next to me right now, but I don't like it as a beginner's language. And then C++, which is a muddle of hundreds of different features which you can learn, but it's overwhelming for a beginner after the first few days of learning it. So from now, I'm expecting everyone here to have basically gone out and learned their programming language, go and pause it, go and learn the entire thing, write a dozen programs or something, basic text prompt programs and all of that, and then come back. So, and now I've expected you to have learnt it. So from now on, I'm assuming that you've learnt your language, you've gotten over all of the basics like functions, references, arrays and classes, and everything prior to that really. So I'm assuming that you've gone over it and not just gone like, oh, let's pause the video and have a 10-minute look. No, I'm saying go out, maybe do a weekend of it or something. Make sure you know it. And that's not the only thing you need to learn, especially if you're going to do graphical games, and especially 3D ones. So I'd say the bare minimum that you should know with regards to mathematics when it comes to that is obviously algebra. There's graphs that you could learn, trigonometry, vectors of course, because like, you know, movement with that. And calculus certainly helps. I'm trying to think of a specific part of calculus that would help, but I'm not very good at calculus, but because I haven't really looked at it much. But things like, I can see uses for differentiation, integration with regards to the graphs, you know. So, assuming you know that, there's basically a couple of libraries that I've had a look at that are pretty good for people who want to do stuff. So, first of all, I'm going to mention N-cursors as I always do, because it's really easy. It's not designed per se for computer games, but it's used by a lot of them. Like, basically, I'd say a large chunk of roguelikes use it, and that's why I started using it, and I wrote a bunch of games with it. And it's really easy to learn. It amazes me that it isn't more popular, because while it doesn't produce images in the same ways that the other three do, I think it's very good for a starting point at least, and I think it's at least worth maybe an afternoon of your time, even if you're not going to use it again. Just write a couple of programs with it. It's on every single language you can imagine. I think you can probably even use it with assembly, like every other one. But so the next one I'm going to mention is something called Allegro 5, which is probably the second most popular. I'm not sure about ClanLib and other ones like that, but Allegro 5 is very popular, but it's not as popular as some other ones. Now you can have a look at that. The one after that I think is better, because it doesn't have such annoying goddamn function prototype names, because it's a real pain typing out. As you probably know if you've programmed, it's irritating to type out like commands that are like 80 characters long. They're really annoying, they take up too much time, and well, if you can get over that, go for that. Though you might want to listen to the third one I've got. Now that's called SDL 1.2, which seems to be the de facto for the 2D games, or at least the ones I've played. Things like Dwarf Fortress use it, loads of games use it. I mentioned specifically Dwarf Fortress because Dwarf Fortress is awesome, and I suggest anybody who's still watching plays it, even if they can't get over the gigantic difficulty curve. It's better because it can be it's more useful with C++. It can be used with C, but it's more C++-esque than Allegro in a way. I'm not sure if that's correct, but it's certainly it's a newer one as well, because it was created by Loki Software in the late 1990s, whereas the first Allegro came out on the Atari ST in the late 80s to early 90s. Don't ask me exactly when, because I don't know. And the final one I'm going to mention, for those who are using C++, and there might be wrappers for other language, is called SFML, which is an oddball. I don't really know much about it, but what I've heard of it is good, so if you want to, check it out, but don't consider it a recommendation. It's just, I know it exists, and I'm mentioning it to you. So, hopefully I've helped all of you who are still here, and hopefully I haven't bored you to death, but if I've bored you to death, then probably it might not be the best idea for you to go into game programming, because it's thousands of lines of code, and if you find my monotonous voice boring, you should probably stop. Although there are better tutorials on YouTube, don't get me wrong, and better videos on YouTube for this. I could have created a Flash animation and all that if I had the software, obviously, but I don't have the spare 200 quid. So, thank you for watching. I hope I've helped the people that are interested. Sorry it's just a blank screen the whole thing through, but consider it a podcast. Thank you and goodbye.